The US government is $37 trillion in debt. That's trillion with a T. And somehow, we just keep spending. This year alone, Washington will take in around $5 trillion in taxes, but they're going to spend about $7 trillion. That's a $2 trillion deficit in just 1 year. And don't worry, they'll borrow the difference, like always. But here's what's different now. Interest payments are exploding. The credit rating was downgraded, and even after a major tariff announcement, the US dollar dropped instead of rising. This isn't just about politics anymore. It's about confidence and whether the US dollar can still be trusted as the world's reserve currency. But before we talk about how bad this could get, let's start with something basic. What exactly is the national debt, and why should you care? Part 1. What is the national debt, and why does it matter to you? The national debt is just the total amount of money the government owes. That's it. It's the result of every single year the government spends more than it earns. That's called a deficit, and we've had one for over 20 years straight. So if you're wondering, how did we get $37 trillion in debt? It's not one big purchase. It's death by 1,000 budget cuts every year. And to be clear, we're not just in debt, we're in record debt. We're now at a debt to GDP ratio that's on par with World War II. Except back then, we were fighting literal Nazis. Now, we're just fighting ourselves with tax cuts, spending bills, and politics. Think of it like this. The government is living on a credit card. And not only that, they're using a second credit card to pay the interest on the first one. And guess who's on the hook when the bill comes due? Yeah, it's us, the taxpayers, the workers, the people trying to buy homes, raise families, and keep up with inflation that Washington helped create. And just when you think maybe, just maybe, someone in charge would hit pause on all this, nope. Instead, they doubled down on what they call a big, beautiful bill. Spoiler, it's not beautiful, it's a budget disaster. Let me show you why. Part 2, why it's getting worse, the beautiful bill and runaway spending. The US debt crisis isn't just bad, it's getting worse. And the politicians, they're not fixing it, they're pouring gasoline on it. Let's talk about President Trump's one big, beautiful bill. It sounds like something from a marketing campaign. But here's the reality. This one bill is expected to add $3.4 trillion to the national deficit over the next 10 years. And before you think, well, $3.4 trillion over a decade, maybe that's manageable, let me stop you right there, because this thing is front-loaded. In 2026, it's projected to add $500 billion to the deficit. In 2027, over $600 billion. And that's just from this one bill. Now, to put that into perspective, this year alone, the government is on track to borrow over $2 trillion. That's like maxing out the credit card, then applying for another one to buy groceries. And yes, the bill has popular items. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime. And sure, that sounds great in isolation. But as a country, we're out here dropping quarters to pick up pennies. We're taking short-term political wins at the cost of long-term financial disaster. And the worst part, the more debt we pile on now, the more we'll pay in interest later. And that's money that won't go to schools, roads, or healthcare. But here's the thing. Not all debt is bad. Some debt can actually be smart, strategic. It can stabilize the economy or fund future growth. So the question is, what makes this kind of debt dangerous? Let's break that down. Part 3, why some debt is okay and why this is not. Look, let's be real. Not all debt is bad. Just like in your personal life, taking out a mortgage to buy a house, that makes sense. Swiping 10 credit cards to fund your next vacation? Not so much. Same goes for the government. During a war or a pandemic, yes, we should borrow. That's when you need to keep the economy alive, protect people, respond fast. That's what debt is for. But here's the problem. We're taking on massive debt. Even when times are good, it's like someone getting a bonus at work and still maxing out their credit card on nonsense. That's where we are. Now, to be fair, a moderate level of debt is actually useful. It gives people a safe place to park their savings, U.S. Treasury bonds. These are considered the most secure assets in the world. They're like the economic version of a fireproof safe. But when we go too far, when the national debt balloons like it has now, we run into a big issue called crowding out. Every dollar the government borrows is a dollar that's not going to a home mortgage, not going to a business loan, not going into building factories or funding innovation. And that hurts all of us, seriously. Because here's what studies show. If we simply manage the debt better and bring it down over time, the average American could earn 7% more by 2050. That's not magic, that's math. Less debt equal to more investment in the real economy, equal to higher productivity, equal to better wages. But instead, we're choosing to pile it on, even when we don't have to. And the longer we do that, the more expensive it gets. And that brings us to the next big issue, interest payments. Because when you borrow $37 trillion, you don't just owe the money back, you owe interest. And that's where things really start to spiral out of control. Part 4, the interest time bomb. We now pay more in interest than we spend on the military. I let that sink in. We're not buying tanks. We're not building bridges. We're just paying interest, like a giant minimum payment on a credit card that we never stop using. And here's the scary part. The cost is compounding. Every year, we borrow more. So every year, the interest bill gets bigger. And now, we're borrowing just to pay the interest on what we already owe. Remember, this is all happening before the next crisis. Because let's be real. At some point, another emergency is going to hit. Recession, war, banking meltdown. And when it does, the government will have to borrow even more. So what happens when interest payments become the biggest line item in the federal budget? What happens when investors look at all this and say, yeah, maybe U.S. debt isn't so safe after all? Because here's the thing. Debt is dangerous, but what really breaks the system is when people stop trusting you'll pay it back. And that moment, it's starting to show up. Let me show you what happened the last time investors got nervous. Part 5, market confidence is shaking. You know what used to happen when the world got scared? They ran to the US dollar because it was the safe haven, the most trusted currency on the planet. But something very different just happened. After the big tariff announcement, when markets got shaky, investors didn't run into the dollar, they ran away from it. Let me repeat that. For the first time in decades, money fled the US for safety. That's not a good sign. That's a big red flag. And it's not just about tariffs or Trump or Biden or whoever you want to blame. It's about trust. And guess what came next? The U.S. got its credit rating downgraded. Yep, Uncle Sam's IOUs are now officially less reliable. And behind the scenes, central banks are making moves too. They're buying less U.S. debt and stockpiling gold instead. Why? Because they don't want to get caught holding the bag if this debt spiral turns into a full-blown fire. Foreign investors, especially countries like China and Japan, they're watching this very closely. And once the world starts doubting the dollar, well, the whole game changes. And that brings us to the most important question. When does it all break? Because markets can stay calm for a while until one day they don't. Part 6. When does it all break? Let's just be honest here. There's no magic red button that says crisis starts now. That's not how this works. The debt crisis doesn't explode because we hit a specific number. It breaks when trust disappears. And here's the scary part. That moment could be tomorrow. Now let me walk you through what economists call the doom loop. And yes, it's just as bad as it sounds. First, the government borrows more money to pay for overspending. That extra borrowing drives up interest rates. Higher interest rates mean even more money goes toward interest payments, which means we have to borrow even more. And then one day, the market panics. Investors start demanding even higher returns because they're not sure we can pay it back. That's when the spiral turns into a crash. That's the loop. Debt, higher rates, more debt, panic, collapse. Now economists have run the numbers. They say when U.S. debt held by the public hits 175% to 200% of GDP, we're in full-blown danger zone. And no, you can't just raise taxes to fix it at that point. You literally couldn't raise taxes high enough to cover the interest bill without crashing the economy in the process. It's like trying to stop a train going 100 miles per hour with a roll of toilet paper. It's too late. And when that moment hits, it's not just the government that feels it. Even the safest AAA-rated corporate bonds get more expensive. Your mortgage rate goes up. Your student loan costs more. Your credit card interest spikes. Businesses stop investing. Unemployment rises. Boom, recession. This is not a far-off fantasy. This is what happens when trust evaporates. The U.S. has always been the safest place to park money. But if that perception cracks, if markets believe we can't get our act together, everything unravels fast. Now, some people will ask, well, can't we just grow our way out of it? That's a fair question. After all, if the economy booms, wouldn't that mean more tax revenue, lower debt to GDP, and a smoother path forward? Well, let's talk about that next. Part 7. Can we grow our way out? You might be thinking, well, can't we just grow the economy faster and escape this mess? And hey, that sounds great. In theory, sure, if the economy booms, people earn more, businesses thrive, and the government collects more taxes. That's more revenue. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Because here's the issue nobody wants to talk about. Our spending is also tied to economic growth. So as the economy grows, guess what happens? Social Security payouts go up, Medicare spending rises, federal salaries increase, government programs expand. It's like running on a treadmill where the speed keeps increasing as you try to run faster. You're not getting ahead, you're just trying not to fall off. Now let's look at the actual numbers. We're sitting on $37 trillion in national debt, and interest on that debt is climbing fast, especially with higher rates. Even if we grow the economy, tax revenues won't keep up with both the rising spending and the exploding interest payments. Let me give you a visual. Imagine trying to bail out a sinking boat with a teaspoon while someone else is drilling new holes in the hull. That's the current strategy. Grow our way out while still borrowing like crazy. So yes, economic growth helps. But no, it's not enough to outrun this debt spiral, not when we're adding trillions more every single year. So, if we can't grow our way out, and we clearly can't borrow our way out, then the only option left, we've got to face some uncomfortable truths. Let's talk about what actually needs to change, and why no one in Washington wants to touch it. Part 8. What needs to change? The unpopular truth. Let's be real. Everyone's talking about the debt crisis, but no one wants to touch the real issue. Fixing it means making hard choices. And yes, everything needs to be on the table, even the sacred cows. Now, I'm not saying we need to gut everything, but we can't keep spending like this and pretending tax tweaks around the edges will magically fix a $37 trillion problem. Let's break it down. Spending reform, because we're not printing monopoly money. Social Security, yeah, it's going insolvent. The trust fund is expected to run dry in less than 10 years. After that, it'll only be able to pay around 77% of promised benefits. That's not a conspiracy. That's from the government's own report. Medicare, same story. The Hospital Insurance Trust Fund is on track to be depleted by 2031. And no, we can't just find the money somewhere. We've been finding it on borrowed time for 2 decades. And don't even get me started on defense spending and federal waste. There are defense procurement programs running billions over budget, and bureaucracies with 40-page reports on stapled policies. We spend like we have infinite credit, but even credit cards have limits. Revenue reform, not just raising taxes, actually fixing the system. Now, let's talk revenue. No, we don't need to tax the middle class into the ground, but we do need serious tax reform, and not the kind that gets rewritten every administration. We need a system that's stable, broad, and makes sense, close loopholes, simplify brackets, and maybe, just maybe, stop rewarding companies for keeping their profits overseas. Because right now, we have a Swiss cheese tax code, and guess what? Billionaires and multinationals know how to find every single hole. So here's the truth. It doesn't have to be painful, but it has to be different. If we're not willing to make any hard choices, then the crisis will make the choices for us. And here's the thing. We're not doomed yet. But the window to act, it's closing, fast. So the question is, do we fix it now, or do we wait until the market forces us into panic mode? Because once confidence is gone, there's no pause button. Part 9. Final warning. Let's not run the experiment. Look, we're not doomed. But let's be honest, we're not doing great either. In 2008, we had room to borrow. We had space to maneuver. COVID hit. Again, massive spending, but the world trusted us. We had margin. We had credibility. But now, we're $37 trillion in debt. We're borrowing $2 trillion more this year, and the government still isn't slowing down. And now they're passing bills that add another $500 billion next year alone. We used to be able to borrow during a crisis, but the question is, will we be able to next time? What happens if the market doesn't believe in us anymore? Here's the scary part. We don't know exactly when things will break. Could be 5 years from now. Could be tomorrow. Once global investors say, nah, I don't trust this anymore, we won't get a warning shot. We'll get a full-blown crisis. And at that point, it's not about solving the problem. It's about surviving the fallout. So here's the bottom line. Let's not run the experiment. Let's not find out what happens when we hit the wall at full speed. We can fix this, but only if we act before markets force our hand. If you value truth over sugar-coated politics, then hit that like button. It helps the algorithm, and it tells YouTube this topic matters. And make sure to subscribe, because I'll keep bringing you the real numbers, the real impact, and the hard truth most people won't say out loud. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think we still have time to fix this? Or are we already too far gone? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.